Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone. Well, a couple of months ago, and only a couple of years after it was released, I finally got around to reading Larry Sidentop's new book, Inventing the Individual, The Origins of Western Liberalism. Now, this is a really good book. I highly recommend it. Basically, what makes this book so fascinating is that Larry Sidentop is someone who is an ex-Oxford University lecturer. He is someone who comes at these issues from a secular perspective, but he goes right back to pre-Christian pagan Rome and pagan Greece, these two great civilizations, and shows how even at their pinnacle, they did not have the same moral intuitions that we all take for granted today. These basic moral intuitions about how human persons should be treated, about human rights, about human equality. And he explains, so he starts in pagan Rome and pagan Greece and he works his way forward from there, and he shows how it is exclusively because of Christianity that we have these concepts as part of our modern Western understanding of what he refers to as liberalism. And this whole concept of human rights, human equality, this idea that every human is equal, that every person should be treated with the same basic dignity and respect, and that they should be afforded their basic rights. These ideas are not something that come from paganism. They are not something that come from secularism, as some people might seem to wrongly think. They are ideas that come directly as a result of the fundamental philosophies which lie at the heart of Christianity. Now, he doesn't get everything right in the book. He makes a few little mistakes. So, for example, he treats people like St. Paul and St. Augustine as if they were these sort of salesmen who arise and create or reshape Christianity in some new way. In actual fact, they are simply building on the tradition that is handed to them, which starts obviously with the person of Jesus Christ and his religious teachings. It's very clear, for example, in the life of Christ, that you see that he does not hold different people, regardless of their status in life, as being worthy of different treatment. He has an equality of treatment, and his engagement with people, regardless of their status or their wealth or their gender or anything like that. He engages with people and has a profound respect for their dignity, regardless of who they are. And this is a very foreign concept to those to the cultures in the times in which obviously Jesus Christ is born and Christianity follows hotly on his heels. He founds Christianity. Now, Larry Sidentop goes back to St. Paul, who writes to the church in a place called Galatia, and there's something very specific he says to them, where he declares that there is now no Jew or Gentile, no woman or man, no free or slave, all are one in Jesus. And Larry Sidentop really says this is the first declaration, if you like, of spiritual equality. And it's from that point onwards that effectively the basic freedoms and moral intuitions that we all take for granted today, they were set in motion. Pagan Rome, even at its height, had nothing like this. Pagan Greece, even at its height, its great intellectual heights, they viewed that there were just certain people who were born inferior to the rest of us. They had very much a class structure, and there were some people who were just born lower than the rest of us, and that was their lot in life. They did not have this concept of human equality. It's very much Christianity which gives that to the world. Also, in the ancient cultures, there was this very stark difference in how rights were meted out, if you like, particularly between males and females. And it's only really through the male head of the family that you actually have any rights. If you are a woman, your identity, your legal identity only exists in relation to either your father or your husband. In fact, that the rights that a husband and father had were what we would call today extreme. Your father could legally kill you in the ancient world. Infanticide was widely practiced in the ancient world. Parents killing their own children, very common practice. Some scholarly experts that I've read suggest that at some points it could got as high a death toll as almost 50% of young children were being killed in this way. Now, obviously, we look back on that with absolute abhorrence, and we would, if someone was to suggest that we should reenact the practice of infanticide today, we would be rightly mortified by that. But that moral intuition that we have didn't arise in a vacuum. It's very much something that flows out of Christianity. Not only that, but there were no obligations on men as to how they were supposed to treat their wives. Now that all changes in Christianity. Again, St. Paul, who writes to the church at a place called Ephesus, and he declares that men are supposed to love their wives like Jesus loved the church, and they're supposed to give up their lives, sacrifice their very lives for their wife. Now, this is the first time you have obligations now being made or demanded of husbands. It's really quite a profound change. Also, because of Christianity, you get a situation that arises where women no longer have to marry to gain status, to gain societal status and respect. And you have women who are consecrating themselves as virgins, unmarried virgins, within the Christian faith, what we would closely probably call nuns today, the equivalent of a nun. And not only there was no problem with that, and were they respected and they were given status within the community, but within 100 years or so of the founding of Christianity, you have entire congregations of these women who are grouped together, living a life together, and self-governing. It's really quite a profound change, and it sort of carries on from there. He sort of traces history from that point onwards. He talks about various developments that happen. He talks about canon law and how that really shapes the beginnings, these basic sort of charters of rights that begin to rise up within cities, and they are just the beginning formulations of individual rights. But again, he says all of this goes right back to this fundamental notion that Christianity starts teaching the world that everyone is equal in the eyes of God, and everyone is created with this profound dignity and worth. And this is the fundamental changing point. Now, why this book and this conversation I think is so timely and so important is because right now it's very common in the public square for people who present ideas from a religious perspective, especially about the big questions in society, to be ridiculed and mocked, or to be shut right out of the public square just because they are coming from a religious perspective. And what Larry Sidentop is really arguing here is that that is not only an infantile thing to do, it's really dangerous for the West, because our entire concept of civilization and society as the West is very much inseparable from Christianity. When you sever the two, you have a big problem. And so we actually need a much better and more adult public square, if you like, where we don't engage in these childish behaviours of dismissing people simply because they come at issues from a religious perspective, and we don't just dismiss them out of hand. Instead, we realise that, for example, Christianity now has a storehouse of 2,000 years of wisdom and philosophical insight when thinking about moral and ethical questions and the worth of the human person and how they should be treated. And that really should be respected and listened to at the very least. Now, you might not agree with it, you might not go along with it, but at the very least, we should be listening to these voices. I mean, I often use an analogy. Imagine it's 2 a.m. and I knock on your door and I say your house is on fire. What's the first question you ask me? The first question you ask me is not, oh, are you a religious person? And if I was to say, yes, I'm a Christian, you wouldn't say, oh, well, I'm going back to bed then because I don't trust Christians. Instead, what you would do is you would say, show me the evidence. Where is the fire? And I think the same is true in a lot of these discussions and debates that we have in the public square. And this has become particularly prescient now in light of the fact that Islam, and particularly radical Islam, has become a real challenge and a real threat to Western society. And there are some big questions we're going to have to face as a result of this in the coming years and decades. And Larry Sidentop actually points to that problem, because he says fundamentally Islamic society is structured completely differently to Western society because it was Christian. Western society is Christian in nature, and the underlying principles and the underlying view of reality is different, and that's a real problem. Now, there are some people who might try and argue, well, why don't we go a third way and just cut both of them out of the mix, and we'll end up with some sort of new scientific, purely secular, hard sort of materialist way of looking at the world. Well, the problem is that hard materialism cannot really engage effectively with some of those big, complex existential questions about meaning and existence and morality and ethics. I mean, the best you can hope for is some sort of utilitarian philosophy where the end justifies the means. But as we all know throughout human history, there are plenty of evil things that can end up being done in the name of justifying a supposed good outcome, regardless of whether or not you even get the good outcome. As long as the good outcome is supposedly on the table, people have done all sorts of atrocious things throughout human history. So the last thing we would want to is to resort to some sort of utilitarian or hard materialist-based approach. Instead, what we've got to do is rediscover this sort of open dialogue, if you like, and the underlying principles, these authentic and fundamental principles that really do and are pivotal to founding the West as we know it today. And to do that, what that means is the public square has got to once again open up and be willing to embrace and engage with that Christian perspective on issues. Like I said, that doesn't mean everyone has to become Christian, but we do have to acknowledge that the West as we know it today and the moral intuitions that we all take for granted, they did not arise in a vacuum. And it's really important that if we are going to fight for the West, as a lot of people are starting to talk about now, the need to actually fight for the West and to preserve that culture, you cannot fight for the West and preserve that culture if you don't understand and aren't willing to actually defend the foundation on which it's built, regardless of whether you are a Christian or not, as Larry Sidentop himself comes at this issue from a secular perspective. But the arguments he makes are really succinct and really clear. I highly recommend the book, Inventing the Individual, The Origins of Western Liberalism. You can purchase a copy online. I think there might even be an e-book available, but it's a really, really good read. And I think everyone needs to read this book as soon as they can. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Left Foot Media.